I had always lived a quiet life in my suburban neighborhood. My home was my sanctuary, a place where I could unwind after long days, enjoy my hobbies, and occasionally work from home when my job allowed. I wasn't the most social neighbor, but I kept my property well maintained, followed the HOA rules, and never caused trouble. So when I opened my mailbox one morning and found an official letter from the HOA, I had no reason to expect anything unusual. But as I read the words on the page, my stomach dropped. Notice of violation. Unauthorized business operations detected at your residence. I had to read it twice just to make sure I wasn't imagining things. My house a business? That was ridiculous. I wasn't running any kind of business. I didn't even have people coming in and out of my home like a business would. The letter went on to state that my property had been monitored, and that I was suspected of using it as a place of commercial activity, which was strictly against HOA regulations. It also mentioned that I had 7 days to cease all operations or face escalating fines, legal action, and potential restrictions on my property. I immediately felt a wave of frustration. Who had reported this? What monitoring had they done? If I was supposedly running a business, then why hadn't anyone from the HOA actually come to talk to me before sending an official warning? I paced back and forth in my living room, gripping the letter tightly. This had to be a mistake. Maybe they had confused my house with someone else's? Maybe it was some kind of clerical error? But no, my name and address were clearly listed. This was intentional. I needed answers. Determined to clear up whatever misunderstanding had taken place, I marched over to the HOA office that afternoon. The HOA president, Mrs. Linda Reynolds, was a stern-looking woman in her mid-50s with sharp eyes that made her seem like she could see straight through people. She sat behind her desk, tapping a pen against a folder that I assumed contained my case. Before I could even fully explain myself, she cut me off. Mr. Robert, we take HOA violations very seriously. Running a business from home disrupts the community and violates the agreement you signed when you purchased your property. I clenched my fists, trying to remain calm. I'm not running a business. She raised an eyebrow. We have multiple reports stating otherwise. From who? I demanded. She smirked slightly, as if she enjoyed having the upper hand. We can't disclose that information. But I can tell you that your property has been observed with suspicious activity, excessive deliveries, multiple visitors coming and going, and increased vehicle traffic. I nearly laughed out loud. That's completely false. The only deliveries I get are from Amazon, just like everyone else. And as for visitors? My brother comes by once in a while to help with house projects, but that's it. Linda sighed, flipping through the papers in front of her. Well, the reports state otherwise, and unless you can prove that you are not operating a business, the fines will proceed as scheduled. I gritted my teeth. Prove my innocence? Shouldn't they be proving my guilt? I knew arguing with her was pointless, so I left before I said something I'd regret. But one thing was clear, someone had lied about me. As I walked back to my house, my mind raced. Who in the neighborhood would make up a false complaint against me? And why? I didn't have any enemies, at least, none that I knew of. Sure, I'd had a few minor disagreements with some of my neighbors before, but nothing serious enough to warrant something like this. The only real incident that came to mind was from a few months ago. My neighbor, Mr. Thompson, had complained about my driveway. He lived 2 houses down, and was the type of HOA loyalist who took every rule as gospel. One day, he saw my brother's truck parked in my driveway for a couple of days while we worked on some repairs inside. Thompson had angrily accused me of allowing an unauthorized vehicle on my property, even though there was no such rule in the HOA bylaws. At the time, I thought he was just being his usual self, petty and overzealous about HOA rules. But now, I was starting to wonder. Could he be the one who reported me? That evening, I stood outside my house, watching the street carefully. If someone was making false reports about me, they had to be watching. But who? As I scanned the neighborhood, I noticed something strange. Mr. Thompson was standing outside his house, talking to another neighbor, and they both kept glancing in my direction. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their expressions and body language screamed suspicion. I felt my blood boil. Was this their doing? Had they been watching me, waiting for any excuse to cause trouble? Determined to find out more, I casually walked toward my driveway, pretending to check my mailbox. As I got closer, I overheard a snippet of their conversation. Can't have people like that breaking the rules. If the HOA doesn't take action, the whole neighborhood will go downhill. I gritted my teeth. That confirmed it. They were definitely talking about me. At that moment, I knew I couldn't just let this slide. I wasn't going to be another victim of petty HOA politics. If they thought I was just going to roll over and accept false accusations, they were dead wrong. Back inside, I pulled out my phone and started documenting everything. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd play smart. I saved every Amazon order receipt, took pictures of my driveway showing the lack of traffic, and even checked my home's security cameras for footage that could prove I wasn't running a business. I also knew I needed to talk to other neighbors, the ones who weren't in on this scheme. If I could find people who had seen my day-to-day activities and could vouch for me, I might be able to expose the lies. I didn't know exactly how I was going to do it yet, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going down without a fight. This was just the beginning. The HOA thought they could pressure me into paying ridiculous fines for something I didn't even do. My nosy neighbors thought they could ruin my reputation without consequences. But they were about to learn that I wasn't the type to back down. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept thinking about how unfair this whole situation was. I had done nothing wrong, yet the HOA was treating me like some criminal mastermind running an illegal operation out of my house. The next morning, I decided to check my mailbox again, half expecting another ridiculous notice from the HOA. I wasn't disappointed. A bright red envelope was sitting inside, stamped with the HOA's official seal. Another violation notice. Second warning: failure to cease business operations will result in fines of $200 per day. My jaw clenched. $200 a day? For something I wasn't even doing? This was getting out of control. To make things worse, as I was reading the letter, I noticed two HOA board members standing near the entrance of the neighborhood, talking to my neighbor, Mr. Thompson. They kept glancing in my direction. I knew it. He was behind this. An hour later, I heard the sound of voices outside. When I peeked through my window, I saw a group of people gather near the community clubhouse, including several HOA board members. I didn't want to deal with this nonsense, but my gut told me I needed to see what was going on. So, I threw on a jacket and headed over. As I approached, I heard Linda Reynolds, the HOA president, speaking in a loud, authoritative voice. This is exactly why we have these rules in place. We cannot allow homeowners to take advantage of our community and disrupt our peaceful neighborhood with unauthorized business activities. People in the small crowd murmured in agreement. Then I saw her hold up a piece of paper, my violation notice. My blood boiled. They were using me as an example. Publicly. Without even proving I had done anything wrong. I cleared my throat loudly, stepping forward. Interesting speech, Linda. Too bad it's based on a complete lie. The crowd turned to me, and Linda's face hardened. Mr. Robert, I assume you're here to admit to your violations? I crossed my arms. No, I'm here to ask why you're spreading false information about me. You haven't provided a single piece of actual proof that I'm running a business. Because I'm not. She scoffed. Multiple reports say otherwise. I smirked. And who made those reports? Let me guess, people like Mr. Thompson? Thompson, who was standing off to the side, turned red. Linda's expression didn't waver. The sources are confidential. Of course they are, I said sarcastically. And let me guess, none of you actually bothered to investigate? You just took someone's word for it and slapped me with fines? She didn't answer. But the silence spoke volumes. Some of the neighbors started whispering among themselves. A few even looked uncertain now. Good. They were starting to see through the HOA's nonsense. After publicly calling them out, I thought the HOA might ease up. I was wrong. The next day, I woke up to find an official HOA sign staked in my front yard. In bold red letters it read, "This property is in violation of HOA rules." I was livid. This was pure humiliation. I stormed outside and immediately pulled the sign out of the ground. A few neighbors were walking by, watching me. I could see the curiosity and pity in their eyes. Before I could even take the sign inside, my phone rang. "HOA caller ID." I answered sharply. "What?" Linda's smug voice came through the line. "Removing official HOA property is another violation, Mr. Robert. I suggest you put the sign back." I nearly crushed my phone in my hand. "You put a sign in my yard accusing me of something I didn't do, and now you're threatening me again?" She sighed dramatically. "If you had just complied in the first place, we wouldn't have had to take this step." I laughed bitterly. "Complied with what, Linda? I'm not running a business." She was silent for a moment, then said, "Then why do you receive so many package deliveries?" I blinked. That's what this was about. I let out a sharp breath. "Linda, it's 2025. Everyone gets Amazon deliveries. Are you going to fine the whole neighborhood for online shopping?" She didn't answer. I continued, "What's next? Are you going to ban guests too? Because that's all my increased vehicle traffic is, friends and family visiting me like normal people." Linda's tone turned icy. "You can fight this all you want, but the fines will continue until you comply." And with that, she hung up. I stood there, gripping my phone, rage bubbling inside me. This wasn't just a false accusation anymore. This was a personal attack. I knew I had two choices. 1. Pay the absurd fines and hope the HOA stopped harassing me. 2. Fight back and prove this was all a lie. Option 1 was not happening. I spent the next few hours going door to door, talking to my neighbors, the ones who weren't blindly siding with the HOA. To my surprise, several of them were just as frustrated with the HOA as I was. One neighbor told me they had been fined for having the wrong shade of blue on their front door. Another had been harassed over excessive decorations during the holidays. A third had received a warning because their kids had left bikes in the driveway for 20 minutes. I wasn't alone. One older neighbor, Mr. Harris, patted my shoulder and said, "Son, that HOA has been power-hungry for years. If you can expose them, you'll be doing all of us a favor." That was all I needed to hear. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about standing up to an out-of-control HOA that was ruining people's lives over petty nonsense. And I had an idea on exactly how to do it. I spent the next day preparing my counterattack. First, I compiled every piece of evidence I had. Heavy checkmark my Amazon receipts to show that my deliveries were nothing out of the ordinary. Heavy checkmark video footage from my home's security camera proving I didn't have unusual traffic at my house. Heavy checkmark statements from neighbors who had witnessed how unfairly I was being treated. But I needed one more thing: proof of who was actually running a business. Because I had a strong feeling the real culprit was out there, and the HOA knew it. It was time to dig deeper. They wanted to play dirty? Well, I was ready to play smarter. I was done playing defense. The HOA thought they could push me around, but they underestimated just how stubborn I could be. If they wanted to accuse me of running a business from home, I'd force them to prove it, or expose their incompetence trying. I spent the next morning sorting through my security camera footage. My cameras had been running 24/7 for months, and I knew they held valuable proof that my house wasn't some illegal business operation. After scrolling through hours of footage, I found exactly what I needed. 1. No unusual customer traffic. My driveway was empty most of the time, except for normal Amazon deliveries and friends stopping by occasionally. 2. No business signs, no shipments, nothing suspicious. The only business happening at my house was me binge-watching Netflix after work. 3. The real giveaway? There was another house in the neighborhood with frequent, suspicious activity. I had a lead. If I was getting accused of something I didn't do, then someone else in the neighborhood had to be responsible for the actual rule breaking. I spent the next few days observing the neighborhood more carefully. And that's when I noticed it. The house 3 doors down had multiple different cars pulling in and out every day. Sometimes, I'd see people carrying large boxes in and out of the garage. At least twice, I saw customers handing over money at the door. It didn't take a genius to figure out what was happening. Someone else was actually running a business from home, right under the HOA's nose. And yet, they chose to go after me instead. I decided to pay Linda Reynolds a visit. If she was so confident in the HOA's claims, let's see how she handled actual proof of her incompetence. I walked into the HOA office, holding a thick folder full of security footage snapshots, delivery records, and witness statements. Linda was sitting behind her desk, sipping her overpriced coffee. She looked up and smirked. She thought she had already won. "Mr. Robert," she said in a sickeningly sweet voice, "are you here to finally accept your fines?" I dropped the folder onto her desk. "Actually, I'm here to educate you on what a real investigation looks like." Her smirk faltered. "Excuse me?" I opened the folder, showing her clear evidence that my house wasn't being used for business purposes. Security footage timestamps proving my home's minimal traffic. Receipts showing my Amazon deliveries were personal purchases, not business transactions. Statements from multiple neighbors confirming I wasn't running any kind of company from home. She flipped through the pages, her expression darkening. I could tell she was trying to figure out a way to dismiss the evidence. Then I pulled out my final piece. A stack of printed screenshots from my security cameras, showing the real culprit's house. "You accused me of running a business," I said, tapping the pictures, "but I think you were looking at the wrong house." Linda's face turned an unnatural shade of red. This is irrelevant," she stammered. "We received multiple complaints about your house." I raised an eyebrow. "From who?" She froze. She had walked into her own trap. "The reports are confidential," she said weakly. I leaned forward. "Or maybe they don't exist at all." I wasn't done yet. "If you find me again without actual proof," I said slowly, "I'll be filing a legal complaint against the HOA for harassment and defamation." Linda swallowed hard. "And," I continued, "I'll be sharing these images with the entire neighborhood. I'm sure people would be very interested to see how selective your rule enforcement really is." Her fingers clenched around the folder. She was trapped. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she exhaled sharply and slammed the folder shut. "Fine," she snapped. "We'll reevaluate your case." I smirked. That's what I thought. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, I found yet another envelope in my mailbox. This time, it wasn't a fine, it was a summons to an HOA disciplinary hearing. They weren't backing down. They were doubling down. "Fine," I muttered. If they wanted war, they were going to get it. I picked up my phone and started making calls. First, to a lawyer. I wasn't taking any chances. Second, to local news reporters. If the HOA wanted to turn this into a circus, I'd make sure everyone was watching. Third, to every neighbor who had ever been unfairly fined. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was time to bring the entire HOA down. The HOA thought they could bury me under false accusations. What they didn't realize was that I had proof, persistence, and now, a plan. They had called for a disciplinary hearing, assuming I would cave under pressure. Instead, I was about to turn the tables on them in the most public way possible. I knew walking into that hearing unprepared would be a mistake. The HOA thrived on intimidation tactics, hoping homeowners would buckle under fear. Not me. I spent the next 2 days assembling my case like a lawyer preparing for trial. I compiled every piece of evidence I had gathered, security footage, timestamps, and witness statements proving I wasn't running a business. I printed the clearest images of the real culprit's house, the one with constant customer traffic and large deliveries. I reached out to my neighbors, many of whom had their own horror stories about the HOA's unfair treatment. Some were hesitant, but a few agreed to back me up if necessary. I contacted a local reporter. If the HOA wanted to make a spectacle out of this, I'd make sure their actions were exposed. By the night before the hearing, my strategy was airtight. I wasn't just going to defend myself, I was going to expose the entire corrupt system. The next evening, I arrived at the HOA office to find the hearing already in motion. The room was designed to be intimidating. The HOA board members sat at a long table at the front, looking down at the accused, me. A few other homeowners were present as witnesses, though most were likely just there to watch the drama unfold. Linda Reynolds, the HOA president, sat in the center. Her smug expression told me she thought she'd already won. She cleared her throat. Mr. Robert, this hearing is to discuss the serious violation of HOA regulations. I didn't let her finish. Before we begin, I said loudly, pulling a thick folder from my bag, I'd like to submit counter-evidence proving my innocence. Linda's smile faltered, but she regained composure. You'll have a chance to speak after we present our findings. No, you'll look at this now. I walked up to the table and slammed the folder down in front of her. Murmurs rippled through the room as she hesitated before flipping it open. Inside were photos of my house proving there was no business activity. Screenshots of my security footage showing that I barely had visitors, let alone customers. Statements from my direct neighbors who confirmed there was no business being run. Linda's lips tightened. This doesn't change the fact that we received multiple complaints. I smirked. Oh, don't worry. I looked into that too. I pulled out a separate folder and opened it to reveal a different set of images. Multiple photos of another house in the neighborhood, the actual rule breaker. Screenshots of their driveway, where different cars were pulling in and out all day. Footage of people exchanging money at the doorstep. Records of bulk deliveries arriving at their home on a regular basis. A few gasps echoed from the crowd. Even some of the HOA board members started shifting uncomfortably. Linda's expression turned cold. Where did you get these? From my security cameras. I leaned forward, my voice sharp. Something you should have done before accusing me. The room was dead silent. Linda's face was a mixture of shock and anger. She hadn't expected me to fight back this hard. But I wasn't finished. You didn't investigate properly. You just picked an easy target, me. I turned to the audience, making sure every homeowner in the room could hear. And I'm not the only one you've done this to, am I? More murmurs. A few people nodded. Linda's hands gripped the table. This is completely inappropriate. What's inappropriate? I cut in. Is the fact that you've been selectively enforcing HOA rules based on who you like and who you don't. I gestured toward the real culprit's house photos. You ignored a real violation right under your nose while trying to slap me with fake fines. I let the words sink in before delivering my final blow. Unless, of course, this was all about money. Now the entire room was staring at her. And then, from the back of the room, one of my neighbors stood up. This isn't the first time the HOA has done this, she said firmly. I was fined last year for a yard violation that didn't even exist. Another neighbor chimed in. They did the same thing to me. They sent me a warning letter for a parking issue, even though I followed every rule. It was like opening the floodgates. One by one, homeowners started speaking up. Linda's face turned pale. She had lost control. Linda cleared her throat, clearly rattled. This is highly unorthodox. We will need time to review this new information. I crossed my arms. You mean you need time to come up with another excuse? A few people chuckled. Even some of the board members looked embarrassed. At that moment, the local reporter I had contacted walked into the room. Linda's eyes went wide. Sorry I'm late, the reporter said, setting up a small recorder. I heard there were some questionable HOA practices happening here. Mind if I listen in? Linda's mouth opened and closed, but she had no idea how to respond. The damage was done. Within 24 hours, everything started crumbling for the HOA. The real culprit was finally investigated and found guilty of running an unapproved business. My fines were dropped immediately. Multiple homeowners started filing formal complaints against the HOA's bias rule enforcement. The local news ran a story on the corrupt practices of our HOA board. And the best part? A week later, Linda Reynolds resigned. She couldn't handle the bad press, the community backlash, and the sheer humiliation of being outsmarted by the very person she tried to take down. As for me, I walked past the HOA office, looked at the empty desk where Linda once sat, and smiled. I had won. But I wasn't done yet. There was still one final move to make. A satisfying payback. With the HOA's corruption exposed, Linda forced to resign, and my name cleared, I could have walked away satisfied. But after everything they put me through, simply getting justice wasn't enough. I wanted payback. Not just for me, but for every homeowner they had bullied, fined, and wrongfully accused over the years. So, I set my final plan in motion. The neighborhood was still buzzing from what had happened at the hearing. Homeowners, once afraid to speak up, were now openly discussing their own HOA horror stories. The board was in damage control mode, trying to regain the community's trust. That's when I saw my opportunity. I started talking to my neighbors, asking them a simple question. What if we got rid of the HOA altogether? At first, some people hesitated. Is that even possible? One neighbor asked. Oh, it's absolutely possible, I told them. And after everything they've done, I think we have a strong case. That's when the real work began. I researched our HOA's bylaws and found that there was a legal way to dissolve the organization, if we got enough votes from homeowners. I teamed up with a few neighbors, and we started going door to door, explaining the benefits of disbanding the HOA. No more unfair fines. No more corrupt leadership. No more pointless rules controlling how we lived. It didn't take long before momentum started growing. One by one, homeowners started signing the petition. The remaining HOA board members weren't about to go down without a fight. They called an emergency meeting, trying to convince people that the HOA was still necessary to keep the neighborhood in good shape. But the community had woken up. When they tried to scare people with, "What if property values drop?" I was ready. I pulled up real estate reports proving that many neighborhoods without HOAs actually had higher property values because homebuyers weren't afraid of dealing with power-hungry boards. When they tried to say, "We keep the community safe," I reminded everyone that we already had a neighborhood watch and local law enforcement. Their arguments were weak, and everyone knew it. In the past, they ruled through fear and control. But that night? They were powerless. The vote was set for the following week. The HOA, realizing they were losing, started sending out desperate letters trying to sway homeowners to vote in their favor. They even offered to reduce fines and make changes to their rules. But no one bought it. They had their chance to be fair. They blew it. When voting day arrived, the result was overwhelming. Over 80% of homeowners voted to dissolve the HOA. And with that, it was over. The HOA was officially dead. The board members had to step down. The HOA's funds? Refunded back to homeowners. Their ridiculous rules? Gone forever. Linda, who once controlled the entire neighborhood, had to sit back and watch as everything she built crumbled. And me? I finally had my freedom back. With the HOA gone, life in the neighborhood only got better. No more pointless fines. No more power-hungry board members. No more unnecessary restrictions. Instead of being ruled by a corrupt organization, the neighborhood became a true community. We made our own rules. We looked out for each other. And best of all, I never had to worry about another fake accusation ever again. Looking back, I realized something important. The HOA never really cared about the neighborhood. They cared about control. But the second they lost their power over us, they collapsed like a house of cards. I wasn't just falsely accused. I was targeted. But instead of letting them break me, I fought back and won. And in the end? I didn't just get justice. I got revenge.